Good evening, everyone. This is our Wednesday night devotional time, and I appreciate you guys watching this video. I wanted to talk to you guys about an article that I wrote for the Gospel Advocate. So this month's Gospel Advocate is about compassion, the compassionate church. And I wrote an article about compassion towards church leaders, and I thought it would be a good time to kind of talk about that because there's so many decisions that leaders are making right now for our churches, for our congregations, and really these are unprecedented times. We're making decisions about safety. We're making decisions that a lot of church leaders have never really ever made in a congregational context for reopening. And so I think this would be a good time to kind of talk about compassion for our church leaders, because it's easy to sit back and say, why did they do this or why didn't they do that, and to do a lot of second guessing. And really, probably for Christians at this time, what we really need to do is just lean in with compassion, understanding the predicament that leaders are in and helping them really kind of navigate this time. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is kind of how we throw stones at church leaders. And one of the ways that we do so is the criticism stone. And we throw those stones at them. We need to be careful. And when I reflect, sometimes people can come and tell me really anything. And they can, give me some good feedback. They can criticize me. And I can typically take it. But I can take one or two stones a day. I've also had days where something happens and I may get, instead of one or two, I may have had 10 people criticize me for the same thing or different stuff. And it's interesting how my heart processes it. One or two, I can deal with it. I hope not to react defensively or reactionary. But with 10, you just feel defeated. You just feel awful because you've just made so many mistakes in one day. And so it's hard to hear. So one of the good things we do when we maybe want to criticize or to give feedback is, how's your day going? And if the leader says, you know what, I'm frustrated, it's been a hard day, I've got criticized at work, I got criticized in the family, and then a lot of people have criticized me at the church, it probably is not the day to voice your opinions on a matter. It's probably just not the day to do that. That's the day to say, we really appreciate you, and really switch your mindset. That's not the time to give criticism. That's the time to give compassion. And so before we throw a stone of criticism, make sure the person can take it. And you may not be aware of how much they've been criticized that day, so check in first. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32 says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you." And that should be our mindset in all of our conduct with one another. Another thing about criticism when it comes to leadership is the motive stone. In my life, probably the most painful criticism isn't when I've done something wrong. And I've done plenty of wrong. I made a wrong decision. I said something I shouldn't have said. And I like feedback by that because it helps me to be better. And I also, though, some of the most painful criticism is when people just question my core motives. And there's maybe a time and place for that. I haven't always had pure motives. But when somebody assigns me negative motives, when I really meant good, I really tried to do the right thing, I find that really difficult. If you look at Paul in Acts chapter 23, verse 1, even though when he was putting Christians to death and stoning them, he did it in a good conscience. His motive was in a good place, but his actions were wrong, and his motives were wrong. And so, motives can be wrong. And there's maybe a time and place for that, but we don't want to assign negative motives. So one of the principles that we should always live into, always assign negative motives until you have no choice but to assign a negative one. Always assign positive motives until you have to have a negative motive. And so whatever criticism you come to leadership with, always assign a positive motive, because I think that just is helpful. I think that's giving grace and compassion. The last stone is the sabotage stone. And so sometimes people will criticize leaders and they don't see the big picture all the time. And you could see on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning, a deacon, he's at the church building, mowing the grass instead of sipping coffee with his wife. A meal coordinator misses her daughter's recital because she needs to make a meal on short notice. You have an elder who is criticized for not going to the hospital enough, but really he was at a basketball game for another kid. There's so much complexity to the situation that when we start throwing stones too quickly, we don't see the whole picture. So instead of doing that, think about how you can help. So it's always easy to give criticism, but sit back and think, okay, if that elder didn't go to the hospital, maybe the reaction is not to criticize him, but maybe the reaction is, maybe I should start going to the hospital more often. Maybe he is involved in another aspect of ministry, and the mature thing would be, hey, if I'm criticizing this person for not doing this, why am I not doing that? And I think that would change our perspective so much on criticism. And instead of telling people what they need to be doing, we sit back and ask ourselves, why am I not doing that? I think once you have that mindset, you're going to totally change your approach to life. It's interesting that in Exodus, you have this phrase, grumbled against Moses. So when the people of Israel were in the wilderness, over and over again, they grumbled against Moses, grumbled against Moses, grumbled against Moses. I think we all could believe Moses is doing the best job Moses can do. Moses is doing the best he can. He's just human. But the people kept on grumbling against Moses. So let's not grumble. Let's have compassion for our leaders and really sympathize with them. I like what it says in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this, that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. I've seen a lot of leaders drop out of ministry because of the criticism. And I sit back and think, it's better for the followers, it's better for the members when we don't criticize our leaders. Why is that? Because if you do, what we will have is fewer leaders, dying churches, and broken spirits. And that's not what we want in our churches. So during this time, let's be compassionate for our leaders. And appreciate you tuning in, and appreciate you letting me talk about an article that I was requested to write. And I'm glad it came out during this time, because I think, once again, God is leading our work. So thank you so much for tuning in.